Electricast. Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
This episode is brought to you by Bumble. So, you want to find someone you're compatible with, specifically someone who's ready for a serious connection, totally open to having kids in the future, is a tall, rock-climbing Libra, and loves rom-coms with vegan pizzas on Tuesdays just as much as you do. Bumble knows that you know exactly what's right for you. So whatever it is you're looking for, Bumble's features can help you find it. Date now on Bumble.
Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome to our Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and today we're talking with Kara Long. Kara is an entrepreneur, writer, musician, and artist from Irvington, Indiana. Influenced by significant personal losses, she founded the Memory Collective, a venture focused on preserving personal histories through video storytelling. This initiative captures life stories, creating lasting connections with family heritage, especially for future generations overcoming Alzheimer's or loss. Kara's work embodies a commitment to ensuring cherished stories and legacies are remembered and celebrated. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Kara about what she is doing, so let's get started. Welcome, Kara. I am so happy to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, well, before we get started, it's tradition for me to have my guests share a little bit behind the scenes of their personal side of their story. So with that being said, tell us more about Kara, the woman. Who are you? And then we'll talk more about what you do.
Okay, sure. Well, I think a lot of who I am actually heavily influences what I do in my company, so it'll be a perfect segue. So I'm from Irvington, Indiana, which is a little historical town just outside of Indianapolis. And I have been fascinated by stories my whole life, just absolutely loved the idea of storytelling, adventures, even ancient artifacts. Like I was a huge fan of Indiana Jones when I was little, and I would go up into my attic and pretend that I was looking for lost artifacts. And actually, our house was built in 1916, and I don't think everything got cleared out of the attic. So I would actually find like some pretty cool old stuff up there when I was little. But I just always had this kind of passion and drive towards ancient and history and storytelling. And I'm a writer. I've been writing since I was probably like 5 or 6, something. As soon as I learned how to write, I was writing stories. So yeah, I've always had that fascination. Music has played a really big influence in my life. It's not really incorporated into my business, but I play a bunch of different instruments and I do a lot of that as well as singing, just for fun and for energetic release and all of that. And yeah, I had no idea what I wanted to do. When I was little, I always just said I wanted to be an artist. And I did kind of end up becoming an artist, just not in the way that I thought I would. But I went to school for music technology and then realized 3 years into that 4-year degree that that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. But I knew that that wasn't it. So I did finish that degree and I added a second degree in media arts and science, where I fell in love with things like Photoshop work and doing a bit of storytelling in that capacity. And then really just fell in love with 3D modeling. That became just, I thought that was what I was going to do. But when I actually got into that industry, it just ended up not being for me. It was very, well, I mean, I just had always had this feeling in my life that I'm meant to do something more. I'm meant to do something really big with my talents and my life experience. I guess it's definitely worth mentioning. Like, I had a lot of loss as a kid. So I had like a really great childhood. But when I was 12, my big brother, who literally big brother, he was like 6'5" and I'm 5'4", and I was not even 5'4" when I was a kid. So he literally just towered over me. He was 12 years older than me, and he drowned when I was 12. And it was a shock to the whole family, a shock to me. That was my first experience with a significant loss in my life, a human loss anyway. And less than a year later, my dad got sick with a rare disease called amyloidosis. And around my 13th birthday is when he went into the hospital and never came out. He died about 4 months after that. That was in 2003. And since then, I have lost aunts and uncles, grandparents. All of my grandparents are gone. My childhood hero, my Aunt Pat, she had breast cancer and actually battled it for a very long time, even though it was stage 4. But I saw her go through all of the chemotherapy and all of that. And so I had these experiences with loss, different types of death, one where it's, sudden or natural death, or when I say natural death, I just mean from old age, where it's more expected versus very much unexpected with my brother and my dad, who was 53, almost 54 when he died, and also seeing illnesses in various forms taking life. And all of these heavily influenced me. And when I was at this 3D modeling job, I knew that I had all of these skills in empathy and grief, compassion, finding silver linings in our stories to get by, to get through. And I'm like, I can't put any of this on a resume. Like, what in the world am I going to do? And that is kind of where I just made a decision. I don't know what I'm going to do, but this 3D modeling job isn't it. And I pretty much just took a leap of faith. I left that job, and I'm an introvert, very, very strong introvert, and I like being at home. I had always wanted to work from home. And so I thought, hey, maybe transcription would be a temporary job, not a permanent job, but just something to get money coming in, because I'm already a fast typist. I love listening. I love learning. And that temporary job, it was almost like, I don't know how to describe it. It was kind of like the universe just planted the idea in my head of like, this isn't the thing that you're going to be doing, but this is where you need to go next to get to where you're going to be really happy and doing the thing that you were meant to do. And that's exactly what happened. That transcription job led to a lot of things, but namely, it turned an opportunity where we were listening to my husband's great uncle Al's World War II stories.
Yeah, well, I want to stop you there because actually that's
perfect.
where I wanted to transition into. So you've said that your journey's been deeply influenced by your personal losses and your own quest for meaning around that. And so as you were saying, you and we actually talked before. We've known each other a little while now. And you've talked previously to me about your husband's uncle and his stories and of World War II. And that was a pivotal moment for you. So tell us a little bit about that. And how did this project with you working with him transform your career path and lead you to founding the Memory Collective?
Yeah, that's a great question. It truly was the pivotal moment because, like I said, I was training as a transcriptionist, and my husband's aunt, after we had finished interviewing Uncle Al, was like, I'm going to have this transcribed. And I was like, really? I can do that for you. But I think, that project really brought home for me. As I was listening to his stories, I realized I am actually not a history buff. Like when I was in school, I was not one of those kids who couldn't get enough of reading history, but it changed in that moment with Uncle Al because he was there. He was sharing these personal experiences, really like incredible stories, wild stories, educational stories. And I retained more of that like 2.5 hour conversation with him or just listening to him tell those stories than I had ever retained from a textbook. And it was because it was personal. It was because he had been overseas. He was on 4 major campaigns of World War II. He was an airplane mechanic. He was laying down the runways for the planes, and his job was to keep the planes in the sky. I was just mesmerized by this. And I didn't even realize at the time, like, that's not the moment that I knew, like, oh, I have to do, this is my company. Like, this is what I need to do. I still hadn't even realized that this was something that was so accessible to just about everybody, especially with having smartphones in your pocket. We can all record our loved ones, our elders, ourselves, our kids sharing stories all throughout our lives, but we don't do it in this way with this intention. And it was actually kind of this realization, our Aunt Jan, who was the one who prompted this project with Uncle Al, she had bought video equipment, just a little kit, a camcorder kit. She had no idea how to use it. And I don't know whether the project would have happened if either Matt or I had not been there to aid her in setting that up. And I kind of realized later on, I think there's a little bit of just a technological hesitancy with generations that just didn't grow up with that. Like our generation and below and younger will definitely grow up with a lot of that. And that allows, like, I just realized that there's a need for people to receive help with that, which is now what I do in terms of teaching people how to conduct recorded oral storytelling projects with the equipment that they already have. And then if they do need help, if they don't want to do it themselves, then I can help do it for them. So yeah, that project in so many ways, it taught me so much about the nature of recorded oral storytelling, the layers of value that it has, and kind of this gap in, we all tell stories all the time. We're constantly talking to friends, talking to coworkers, sharing stories with our family, moaning about this or that, complaining. They're all stories. And stories have been in our DNA since the dawn of human civilization. And we never actually changed away from that. Our storytelling has just evolved. Back then, it was telling stories around a fire. It was your form of entertainment. It was your form of education. It was your form of passing down knowledge and skills that you needed to survive. And now we don't really have that, but storytellers come in the form of Netflix and podcasts and books and movies. We're still just as obsessed with storytelling today as humans as we were back then. It's just all spread out. And critically, it is not coming from our family members, our ancestry. And it could, but it doesn't, unless we actually bring our awareness back to that and intentionally and critically record it. Because even if you have these conversations with your loved ones, I don't want to say we don't have the capacity to remember it, because we do, but we don't have the training in how to access that capacity for memory and memorization. You have to actively work at that. But if you told me a story once, chances are I'm not going to be able to repeat it verbatim the same way that you did. And we can't do that really anymore in the modern times with our loved ones. And because of that, there is just this devastating silent epidemic of lost memories and heritage. And so that is what I'm trying to help prevent and to change that trajectory within as many families as I can, and hopefully with every family around the world from this point forward. That's the goal.
I like that. And I do like how you have this belief in storytelling and how it has that ability to preserve legacies, right? Family legacy. You might have a great uncle or having someone in your family that has these amazing stories to tell that you might have sat around as a child listening to. If they're not documented, that gets lost. It's like telephone, right? You have a group of people and you start with a message and it ends up at the other end so different. And that can happen with our stories of our lifetime. So I love the fact that you've done this. And as I told you way back in the beginning when I first met you, 2 years ago that I had never heard of anyone doing what you do. And so I really love that. So can you share an example of how a video biography has impacted a family or an individual that you've worked with?
Yeah, I've got a great one actually. So, one of my dear friends, close friends, he had the forethought before my company ever existed. He was one of the few who actually thought, like, my dad has some great stories. And he noticed that when his dad was telling some of the same stories, he was telling them a little bit differently. He was kind of leaving out some of the detail. Like the detail for his dad was starting to fade. And my friend noticed that, who's around my age. He noticed that. And so he was like, around Christmas, I'm gonna see if my dad will sit down with me and just tell some of his stories. He didn't even set out necessarily to have his dad tell his whole life story. But that is, for the most part, what happened. They got all the way up to the point that my friend was born, and then a little bit into his childhood, they had planned to continue, and that didn't happen. But they got 10 and a half hours of stories from his dad's life. And his dad very unexpectedly passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2020. And thank God that he had those stories. And so, what my friend had me do, normally I would be the one actually recording those stories with them. He did that on his own. What I did was take those stories and I edited them in such a way that it's not like creating a documentary. I'm not weaving a narrative together to create a story, because the story was what Paul shared. It's his story told in his words. But what I did was make it accessible to easily be able to find the specific story that my friend wanted to be able to hear at that time. I made it possible for family members to be able to hear this one specific story or their favorite story, or to hear a story that they'd never heard, based on like the title. They're like, oh my gosh, what's this story? And through that, it allows his family to be able to kind of explore Paul's life and to be able to share these stories and listen in like little bite-sized chunks. Our attention spans these days aren't super great. So when you've got 10 and a half hours, actually, I'm trying to remember if it was 10 or 12. It might have been 12. The point is, when you've got that much content, the likelihood of you sitting down regularly and watching from beginning to end is not really great. But if you do that even once, you can kind of remember like what your favorite stories are. And it makes it that much easier to go back when they're in little, bite-sized chunks, broken down by the specific story, to be able to find just that one and listen to his voice and listen to his stories and watch. He was such a great storyteller. And one of the beautiful things that happened, so we took those stories and I compiled them into kind of like a best of for his celebration of life. And then we also compiled the best of and his entire collection of stories into DVDs. That's something I don't typically do anymore. DVDs are kind of a dying medium. But the one beautiful thing that happened was that, one, at the celebration of life, everybody got to see Paul one more time. They were not expecting to hear his stories. And everybody just stopped. It was like a half-hour video, and everybody just stopped and listened. And my friends said that they were laughing, they were crying, and they were smiling as they remembered him at his celebration of life. The other incredible thing that happened was that, so Paul's sister, unbeknownst to me, had Alzheimer's, and her daughter was with her one day, and they saw this DVD with Paul's face on it. And his sister, Barb, said, "That's Paul. What is that?" And her daughter said, "I'm not sure. Let's put it on and find out." And just by them putting this on, Paul comes on and starts telling stories of his childhood. And Barbara, who was apparently pretty deep in dementia, started to remember. Just by listening to his voice, she started saying like, "Oh, I remember that." That's not how that happened. This is how it happened. And what a gift to her daughter, to see her like that, because she passed away actually a few days after that. I just think about the impact that that can have. And I spoke with a dementia expert, Teepa Snow, and I told her about that experience. And I said, is that like a one-off thing? Was that just lucky? She said, no. The sound of a loved one's voice is so deeply wired that it doesn't surprise me that that happened. And so that's just one more layer of what can happen when you do take the time to record these stories. Like with Barb, if we had had more time, I would love to have known how often that could have helped her come back to herself and to remember. For her daughter, if we had had her stories recorded earlier, for people going through Alzheimer's, it can allow families to, like for me, for instance, I remember my dad and my Aunt Pat being very sick. They didn't look like themselves by the end. And I do remember them like that, unfortunately. But I also have these vibrant memories of them being younger. And that is when I would have loved to have videos of their life story so that I can remember them full of life, full of joy at that point when they're healthy, and not just have this memory of them when they're sick and are not themselves. So, I mean, I could go on and on about all of the different ways that recorded oral storytelling can impact lives. It's truly incredible. I really believe that it is like the most superior medium for memory preservation and documentation because it captures so much more data than any other form. And I say that as a writer, I love photography, scrapbooking is beautiful, but recorded oral storytelling can actually supplement all of those things and provide the data that those mediums lack. So that's why I'm just like a huge proponent.
I agree with you. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why my favorite movie is The Notebook, because of him reading to her the story to bring her back every time she goes away, because dementia is real. It just affects some people to the point where everything goes away. And for her loved one to be reading the story to her and her to come back around to recognizing the voice, saying, oh, I remember that. And then to be, oh, I remember you. So I really love that. So thank you so much. So I want to just talk a little bit more about how, when you're documenting these stories, for whether you're working with someone or you're teaching them how to do it, I know you've kind of touched on it for you personally and for just your own personal experiences, but with people that you actually maybe have worked with outside of family, what has been for them the most important reason why documenting it and maybe has been life-changing for them to remember? And what does it mean? What could it mean for families, especially for those future generations, that someone now who you might talk about might get lost, let's say even 100 years from now? And we're looking back at those memories. What importance, if you can elaborate, I guess, on the importance of this documentation and what it could mean really for future generations so that they don't lose that legacy, learning about, maybe you had someone in your family lineage, like maybe Napoleon was part of your family lineage. And imagine if you'd had some sort of documentation to hear their voice, or even written to get their words so that you could say, this is a part of my history.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful question. I think there's so many layers to this. So you have to look at the value that it can bring. For instance, I just had a client who, she just recently passed away, and we were able to get about 6 hours of her life story. And we actually recorded her singing and playing on the piano. And the woman who hired me to document her grandmother's stories, her grandmother had dementia. So we weren't able to it was not a super linear process like what I would normally do. But for them, knowing that she was at the end stages, knowing that these stories were going to disappear because they were not recorded in any way, like that has immediate impact on the storyteller's children and grandchildren, the grandchild being my client. And from that point forward, I mean, these people mean so much to us, and they teach us things. We are who we are because largely of their influence, their love, their support, and their teachings, their belief systems, all of that. And to me, it's heartbreaking when those people are completely lost from memory. That's happened in my family. It happens constantly in families all across the world because there is no documentation system in place. And what we lose in that is a sense of identity. For instance, like immigrants that are coming into the US, they are or refugees who are forced out of their homes and their entire cultures because they're fleeing to another country. And without some system in place, what ancient times would have been oral storytelling and passing down these traditions. But when you are removed from your culture, your heritage, it's up to you to pass down those stories and traditions. And if you come to some place like America, for instance, it's, I would imagine, pretty easy to get swept up in American culture and lose sight of where you came from and the rich history and traditions and culture that you came from. Like with my grandma came from Italy, and the only cultural tradition that we have from Italy is her Italian meal that we fortunately do know how to make. But that's it. If there were other Italian traditions, I don't know them. And I think that's the case for so many people. So for future generations, having these recordings of their ancestors who are currently living in our time will give them insight into who they are, where they came from, who influenced their parents and grandparents. It can inform on things like generational trauma. It can create a sense of empathy. You can learn skills. You can revitalize traditions that had previously been lost. But as long as they're captured in some way, they can be revitalized at any point, so long as they're documented. There's just so many ways that this can create impact. And I think that it creates a sense of connection and identity with your own family, with heritage. And I know that for one of my clients, he has a long history of education, leadership, and faith in his lineage. And he knows that through oral storytelling. And now that oral storytelling has been solidified because he has it recorded. So like they founded like the first African-American church in a state, and there was another major thing that their family founded. Now that's solidified in his legacy. And he's been able to honor the people who came before him, who helped form his parents, who helped form him. And he will continue to influence his children and grandchildren. And so I just think it's a beautiful way to connect to your family and to everyone who came before you.
I love that. I think it's beautiful the way you said that, because I think it really truly is keeping some form of some way to document it so it doesn't become fragmented and you don't really know the whole truth. And so having someone, and maybe even, they might have lost a little bit of the story, but just hearing their voice, telling the story, it keeps you connected. And I think that's what it's about. So I really love that. So let's talk about the future. Looking ahead, what are your aspirations for the Memory Collective, and how do you envision its role in shaping the way we remember and honor our loved ones in the future?
This part I am so excited about. So I'm working on a membership right now. It's going to, fingers crossed, be released in beta at the end of April. And that platform is designed to bring this into the average family home, make it affordable. And basically, I've essentially written like a textbook, but it's interactive, that will teach people all of these concepts that I'm talking about and how to, in their own way, because recorded oral storytelling is so versatile. Like you can do as much or as little as you want. And this teaches you all of these principles about different ways that you can use it, different ways to approach projects, how to do one from beginning to end, and then also giving you the actual kind of tools if either you want to tell your own story or you'd like to interview a loved one. This will give you the tools of how to do that, including there's something called topic kits, where it's 25 questions about either a broad topic if you want to do just an overview of something, or you can get very, very specific. And we will be continuously adding to that library of topic kits. So you can use that to help tell your story or help your loved one tell their story. So there's that whole side of the company, and that's going to continue to evolve over time. I imagine having additional tiers and releasing more and more helpful features, including storage. So your ability to kind of create this reservoir of ancestral data, all based in recorded oral storytelling and other kind of what I call memory artifacts, which are like the photos that you take, scrapbooks. If you can get it all digitized in one place, then it's very easy to pass it down to future generations. And the goal is that in the future, our children, grandchildren, and all future generations will have this incredible archive that they'll be able to explore and learn about their individual family members, some that they actually personally knew, and some eventually that they never could have known. But how cool is that? Like, if we think back, how cool would it be if we had videos of our ancestors that lived in like the 1800s and they were talking about their everyday lives? I think that would be fascinating. And the farther removed that we become from this day and age, the more fascinating this time period will be to our descendants. So I kind of see it taking off in that direction. Another big thing that I want to emphasize is the concept of ROS journaling, recorded oral storytelling journaling. And this is the concept that you do not actually have to wait until close to your end of life to start documenting your stories. In fact, that's actually, I'm not saying it's the last opportunity, it is not the first. And the sooner that you start recording your memories or memories with your little kids who grow up super, super fast. You know, when we interview elders and I ask them, can you give me a specific favorite story about your child when they were like 2 or 3 or 4 or something like that? About 99 times out of 100, the answer is no, they can't, because they've all homogenized into just a general like, oh, well, they were really funny or they were really goofy or they were very adventurous, but they can't give me specific examples anymore. But through recorded oral storytelling, journaling, you could be talking about that in your, say, 30s, about your child who is having all these cute little moments. You can remember those for the rest of your life. And you can pass on to your kids what were your favorite memories. I think that by integrating this practice into people's everyday life, and it doesn't even have to be every day, it could be weekly or monthly, but even just doing that is going to create connection, increase our memories, because you're activating the hippocampus and signaling to it, this is important, I want to remember this. So by doing that, it'll change the way that we remember the past. It will actually change the course of history. And if people are open to either after they're gone or at a certain period in time, releasing their memories to the public, it literally would change history, because we would suddenly have all of these autobiographical everyday people instead of just having the autobiographies or biographies of, you know, our famous people in the world. So it brings, I think, a normality. It just creates like this celebration of everyday life. And I think that's really important today, like with all of the Instagram influencers, and everybody wants to be famous and do something meaningful. But by taking the time to see these everyday life lessons, everyday moments with your kids, being a good parent, those are successes too. And you don't have to be this huge star to make a difference in the world. You can do it one person at a time with the people that are in your circles that you can influence and make their lives better, and they can then make other people's lives better. So I hope that makes sense. But that's what my hope for the Memory Collective and what it can do. I see eventually it being like this global community, and with smaller individual communities where people are sharing stories with each other. It's all about connection and the documentation of history and changing the way that we think about that.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I think that's incredible to be able to have these stories just for you in your close circle, your family, but also then to be able to share it out into the world, like to to actually have history actually made through, like you were saying, the recorded oral storytelling, keeping an actual documentation of not being just able to say, like you were saying, oh, my kids were like really adventurous, but instead actually having a story to back up why they were adventurous or really funny, why maybe that's how they became a comedian, different comedians, like why people become or start to pursue different things. What is it that made them who they are, that just actually influenced them? And so you being able to record that throughout their lifetime, especially as a parent, I think is incredible. So thank you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful having you on the show today and exploring what it means to preserve families when we preserve our personal histories through the Memory Collective. And your passion around this for storytelling and commitment to keeping memories alive is really inspiring. I'll make sure to include all of the details on how our listeners can connect with you and learn more about the Memory Collective in our show notes. Whether they're interested in capturing their own family stories, learning more about your mission, they'll know exactly how to reach out. So again, your stories and the impact of your work shared today will undoubtedly encourage our listeners to reflect on the value of their own life stories and the legacy they wish to leave behind. So again, thank you so much, Kara, for sharing your time today with us.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure, and I just so much appreciate you and having me on here today.
And to our audience, remember, your stories matter. In the rush of daily life, don't forget to pause and capture the moments and memories that define you and your loved ones. With visionaries like Kara leading the way, we're reminded of the power and importance of documenting our journeys for future generations. So take that step, embrace your story, and contribute to the tapestry of your family's legacy. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Have you ever wondered what actually happens in Congress every day? Stay informed on Capitol Hill's daily happenings with a concise, factual summary of the Senate and House of Representatives' activities from the previous session, free from bias, on the Congressional Record Daily Digest podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and discover the process from the heart of U.S. politics. The Congressional Record Daily Digest, an Electricast production.
Electricast.
Welcome to Sarah Talk Solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, you've tuned into a bit of a different type of show. I'm Sarah B and I'm your host. You can find me on my IG, which is Aussie_Sarah_LA. I talk about amazing, relevant conversations and topics and what functions that goes on in this magical, wonderful, wonderful city of the City of Angels. My IG, which is Aussie_Sarah_LA.
Electricast.